Hey guys, this is Khavrion here with another battle report. This will be for round 1 of the Sectorial Cup by Vaulsc. The Sectorial Cup is a TTS league for infiNity run by Vaul, and instead of introducing custom rules like Vaul normally does, this particular league is made special by the requirement that you have to play as a Sectorial. The thinking is pretty straightforward. In a completely plain ITS format, the meta is pretty rigid. As Vaul has pointed out in a recent video, which I think is itself based on some posts on forums, there are a handful of really good lists based on a number of really good profiles, which act as sort of a black hole pulling standard competitive infiNity play in that direction. And while these lists are out there, it can be hard to show up to a competitive event with something quirky and interesting when you know that that quirky, interesting thing is going to give you a disadvantage against the standard Nomads or Combined Army or whatever meta list. Thus, Vaul has been more or less constantly trying to change up the way in which people play infiNity, and this time he's chosen to do that by requiring everyone to play in a sectorial. There was one other thing, which is that you are required to submit 2 lists ahead of time and stick with those 2 lists until you lose. For my part, I used the fixed list requirement to force myself to play things that were just a little bit outside my comfort zone. I actually did think that both lists I made were dumb, but I was forced to keep playing them because of this fixed list format, and, I think I learned a little bit along the way. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and get started. This is going to be a battle report for round 1 of the Sectorial Cup, which is me as Steel Phalanx versus Ariwch as Hassassins. This is going to be QC Control, which is Vaulsc's version of Supremacy. Like Supremacy, you're going to get points for dominating sections on the board and pushing buttons. But unlike Supremacy, sections are dominated at the end of player turns rather than at the end of game round. Thus, both players have the ability to do what in Supremacy is only able to be done by the person who's going second, which is to notice where your opponent has put stuff and then move stuff into those specific sections where your opponent is in order to tip the balance and win that way. For my part, I think the change is interesting, but I'm not sure it leads to a perfectly balanced mission. Having played this mission a couple of times, it feels like going first is favored, which is different from Supremacy, which favors going second, but isn't totally balanced. That said, the mission plays perfectly fine, and I don't think that the nitpicking details of how the scoring works would really have affected the outcome of this particular battle. Which, let's go ahead and get into. Here is my list. It will end up being the list that I run for all 4 rounds of this event. And my goal with this list was to experiment with Atalanta in hidden deployment, to experiment with the Agema in hidden deployment, and to decide which of those 2, if either, I would prefer. I've ended up putting the Agema in Group 2 and Atalanta in Group 1. My thinking with Atalanta in hidden deployment is that in addition to being able to reveal her if there is a juicy target, she's also quite good in the active turn. In particular, there are just a handful of threats which Steel Phalanx really has no good tools to deal with that aren't Atalanta. Things like tags, or Delamies, or warbands that are going to throw smoke, or, heavy rocket launcher mimetic -6 core linked guys named Phoenix. It wasn't hard for me to imagine that you might want to spend a whole lot of orders on Atalanta shooting stuff, and thus I have put her in Group 1. That will force me to test the hypothesis about Atalanta shooting. On the other hand, the Agema missile launcher, he really is just a trap card that you reveal, thus he belongs in Group 2 along with all the other ARO pieces. Other than those 2, I have tried to stick to a very conventional Steel Phalanx format. I was worried that if I went too crazy, it might be hard to learn things about Atalanta and the Agema, and thus I ran what is effectively a really toned-down version of 2 Enomatarchos Steel Phalanx. You have your first Enomatarchos of Akmon, Machaon, Phoenix, and because I couldn't afford him, we just have a normal Myrmidon there. In the second Enomatarchos, you have Oideros, a Myrmidon, and another Myrmidon. You could, of course, change things up. Akmon could go with Oideros. You could take a Myrmidon away from Oideros and put it with Phoenix to get him the +1 BS for being pure. But I walked into the games with these teams approximately in mind because I wanted Oideros to be a little bit more disposable, whereas Machaon, him being my lieutenant, really just cannot be disposable. So yeah, this is a pretty standard 2 Enomatarchos big boy adjacent list, where I have massively toned down the big boy energy in order to have both Atalanta and the Agema. Now, as I quickly learned, this exact list is not good. While it has a number of really good pieces that are going to be staples of Steel Phalanx play, the way I've put everything together leads to a list that stumbles over itself rather than being the locked shield Phalanx working together type of thing that I'm used to playing. For example, my going in preference of keeping Akmon away from Oideros so Oideros can be disposable means that Oideros doesn't have the tactical awareness and he doesn't have the engineer nearby that can heal him. As another example, having Atalanta in hidden deployment in Group 1 costs Oideros 1 order as he's trying to run around and attack things. Sure, he's fast with his 6-2, and he has NCO, and if you put Akmon with him, he can have that extra order. But even so, his Rambo runs are going to be down 1 order because you've got Atalanta in hidden deployment there, and that's not great. Of course, my thinking had been have Atalanta present in case she needs to shoot something with all of those Group 1 orders, but there were a lot of circumstances in which I didn't want to reveal Atalanta because she didn't have good targets, but I also, really would have liked to have her order there for Oideros to use. So this grouping was awkward, and it was an awkwardness that would annoy me throughout the entire league. The only other really important thing I'd like to bring up is that Oideros is kind of the only good attacking gun that the list has. Like, Phoenix is obviously awesome, Atalanta is obviously, pretty darn good, but they're both long-range, low-burst guns. If you want something that can close with a target and kill it at close range with pretty high reliability, you need someone like Oideros, or like Ajax, or, I don't know, maybe like a Myrmidon Spitfire. And in this list, Oideros is really the only thing that I have. Thus, I was concerned that if he goes down, I am now missing some really crucial functionality. On top of all that, you're dragging around all of these annoying Myrmidons. Now, cards on the table, I am not the Myrmidon's biggest fan. I think they're just a little bit too expensive. I would love for them to be impetuous. Basically, I'd love for them to be a little bit more like the Dadarazi that are so clearly superior to them. But I will every now and then include 1, maybe 2 Myrmidons in my list because at the end of the day, they're still pretty darn good, especially in a link. However, 3 is way too many, and having a team that consists only of Oideros and 2 Myrmidons is not a good idea. Offensively, the 2 Myrmidons with Oideros add nothing. His templates and shooting and close combat are better than them in every single way. And defensively, they are a weak link. They only have 1 wound, they don't have any serious guns, and it's very easy to just knock one of them out and then cost Oideros his extra burst. This, again, would be an ongoing source of awkwardness that I just don't normally have when I'm playing true big boy or big boy adjacent Steel Phalanx. So, in summary, the list that you're looking at in front of you was meant to explore the concepts of Atalanta and the Agema, and it ended up discovering a whole lot of ways in which the list is not synergistic with itself in the way that Steel Phalanx normally is quite synergistic. Next up, here is a very rough version of my opponent's list. I don't know that I got everything right, but let me just take you through the big notes. You have a 4-man fireteam core with an Asawira, a Moyib with tactical awareness heavy rocket launcher, Yara with an AP marksman rifle, and a Gulam. As I make the video, that Gulam probably had a smoke grenade launcher and NCO, because that's just like what you do in Hassassins, but I don't actually know how you pay for it. Not that strange of a core, especially if the Gulam has the smoke grenades like I think it should have. But it's also not that common either. I'm used to seeing the Asawira and Yara in different spots, and the Muyib, I used to, expect to see him all the time at the beginning of N4, but he seems to have fallen out of favor. So, not that strange of a core, but also not that familiar either. Next up, you have a Fide, McMurrough, and a Farzan Chain of Command. These are all standard picks, especially McMurrough, because he's really, really good. Next up, you had a Mutt with chain rifle and smoke grenades. Might have been the boarding shotgun smoke grenade jammer profile. I don't exactly remember. 3 Daylamis, known to Deers, and then you had a Bereed Hacker. The Bereed Hacker might have been in Group 1, but I know he was not deployed with everybody else, and moreover, this Bereed Hacker did not come with a missile launcher bot, and the missile launcher bot I think is standard to include. You lastly have a Bokhtar. My opponent has chosen the Bokhtar with the boarding shotgun +1 burst and the paramedic. This is a new profile from Blackwind for Hassassins. It is their heavy infantry with parachutist and NCO and mimetism and MSV1 and basically all that other stuff. It's a pretty competent laundry list of abilities, but when it clocks in at 53 points, it ends up being rather expensive. That cost means that I really want him to perform reliably if I'm going to be taking him, and I'm just not sure that he does that. Moreover, the cost makes him easy to spot. You've got the gap, because he's off the board with Parachutist, but at 53 points, it's going to be easy to notice that that gap is a Bakhtar instead of being, for example, a Nadir. All of which is to say, when I noticed that a Bakhtar was likely coming, I was curious to see how it played out, but I wasn't, quaking in my boots for fear of the thing. Lists out of the way, let's go ahead and get started with the game. I won the lieutenant role, and because I think QC control favors going first, I decided to go straight for first. My opponent thus chose the, red side of deployment and gave me this. I thought about spending a command token to hold back 2 models, but I ended up just deciding to put everybody on the table and relying on my, orders and mobility in order to get stuff done. Taking you through it, I put Phoenix here. This is actually a little bit of a trap. I was hoping that my opponent would stack Delamies on him, and then I could reveal Atalanta and kill the Delamies. This is Machaon. He's my lieutenant. Try to keep him safe. Myrmidon. Akmon. Akmon's over here so that I can slingshot him back to, this main team after he sends off Oideros. Myrmidon with his tactical awareness. You've got a Netrod here and a Netrod here. They both failed their drop rolls and thus are in stupid positions. You have a Lamed here and a Lamed here. They are both watching for Bakhtars. I don't remember why I was suspicious about Bakhtars at this stage in the deployment, but I was, and I guess it's not that dumb given that you're up against Hassassins. Not present are an Agima missile launcher, who I believe was positioned at this spot, and Atalanta. I believe she was withheld, but I end up putting her on top of this bush. Naturally, the plan is pretty straightforward. I will slingshot this team forward if I have to, and it has the ability to proceed in this direction or proceed in this direction, push some buttons, kill some things, that kind of thing. Oh, last but not least, I do have this Probot who's sitting up here. Meanwhile, here is my opponent's deployment. On the right-hand side, you have the Muyub Heavy Rocket Launcher, Asawira, Yara, and Gulam. You then have the Fanus Flash Pulse Bot. This is the Mutt. This is the Camille. This is McMurrah. This is the Bereed hacker, at least I think it was a Bereed, and you've got Delamy, Farzan, Chain of Command. A lot of these guys you'll notice are standing up. My opponent at this point has noticed the gaps in my list and is worried about Ektromoy. The dudes standing up will make them easier for me to kill, but we did talk about it during the game, and having dudes stand up, I can understand where he's coming from wanting that. His withheld piece ended up being this Fide, who he put right there, and I think that's a perfectly good spot. With that down, let's talk about my turn. I get to go first, and because my opponent has that screen of Delamies and all the rest in Hassassins, I'm pretty sure I won't be able to cripple his army in one go. Instead, my goal is to break that screen, or at least damage it as much as I can, push some buttons if available, leave some points in quadrants so that when we score at the end of my opponent's first turn, I'll have points there, and lastly, make sure that my own defensive position remains really, really strong. This is more or less what I end up doing. Here is what things look like at the end of my turn. As you can see, I have pushed this button, pushed this button, I've killed the Fide over here, and a lot of the Delamies are gone. Basically, what I did was I took the Oideros link and I moved it out in this direction. I was tossing Discovers on the Fide whenever I could, especially after I had stripped Akmon out of the team. This was now pure, so they got a +3 on the Discovers. Having discovered the Fide, I was able to kill it. I then could push buttons with Oideros because he's a specialist, and I could shoot Delamies with Oideros because he's really good at shooting. Once I got done with Oideros, I was then able to move this team out. I moved out to push the button, I think, with Machaon, and then I thought a lot about whether I wanted to actually be out here. I decided I did not want to be out here, and I didn't have that many orders, so I retreated back to this position. Machaon is my lieutenant. I've got to keep my lieutenant safe, otherwise I'm really sad. That's what I did. I'm pretty happy with it, although it was really tempting to want to leave, 100 points of Steel Phalanx out in a quadrant. No freebies, though. I did move my Warcore, so I have some points here, and I was kind of hoping that my opponent wouldn't move enough points up into that quadrant, and maybe that they would try to run something cheap, and if they tried to run something cheap, I could reveal my Agima here, kill it, and thus score this quadrant with the Warcore. All in all, this was a fairly safe turn. Both because I need to play it safe because I'm against Assassins, and because I'm down that one order from Atalanta, and I really only have Oideros as my good gun, so I don't want to take too many risks. Incidentally, I was kind of surprised that I didn't choose to use Atalanta to hunt Delamies. In the past, I've taken Atalanta as a prime Delamy killer, But it turns out that a pure Steel Phalanx core gets +3 on the Discover, and with their Mimetism, they can reliably kill the darn things if the Delamis are discovered and revealed. I thus felt it was better to keep Atalanta safe in hidden deployment than it was to reveal her and, kill stuff. Anyway, that's my turn. Next up, my opponent's turn. He has seen the damage that I have done and decides that he needs to get back at me. The first thing he does is he takes McMurra, who I guess was in group 2, not the same group as the core, and runs him all the way over here to try to attack Oiteros and the Myrmidons. Here is the route that he takes. He goes through this way, he throws smoke here, he throws smoke there, and then having thrown smoke in those two places, he decides to, I think, run out in this direction and put 2 chain rifles across my Myrmidon and Oiteros. It is in this moment that I realize that these Myrmidons are quite frustratingly fragile to things like McMurra with his double chain rifles. With only 1 wound and only, Phys 13 and only armor 2, the odds of them going down to chain rifles, especially repeated chain rifles, is fairly high. Moreover, while they do have chain rifles and nanopulsers and thus can trade themselves, even losing a single one of these guys puts Oiteros down his extra burst, and that extra burst is really important on the attack and really, really, really important on the defense. I did consider trying to reveal Atalanta to shoot at McMurra as he went through, but she's only burst 1, and McMurra's got total immunity, so her odds of actually hitting him and wounding him aren't terribly high. I decided to keep her hidden. Anyway, McMurra is in about this position. He spends like 1 or 2 orders trying to chain rifle me as I dodge, and then decides to move into close combat because I'm not going to dodge if he's in close combat. At that moment, I say, what the heck, drop nanopulsers onto him, shoot him with Akmon combi rifle who can see over here, and when the dust settles, McMurra has failed enough saves to die, and miraculously, the Myrmidon tanks both chain rifle saves. All that happens on my end is that Oiteros takes a wound. That's obviously a really nice trade for me, but it happened because I got lucky, not because the Myrmidons are strong. In fact, they are vulnerable to exactly this sort of thing. Having run out of steam on this right-hand flank over here, my opponent decides to activate and take some shots on the left-hand flank. He ends up, I'm not entirely sure why, but he ends up deciding that he needs to take on Phoenix. And he decides that the way he's going to take on Phoenix is by using Yara, who's down here. Unfortunately, there is a Muyab in this position, and my opponent is running low on orders. What he decides he's going to do is he's going to have Yara stand here to see Phoenix, to shoot Phoenix, and I say, look, Phoenix is going to splash that Muyab, and my opponent says, you know what, that's fine. I don't know exactly what he's thinking, but probably he's thinking that he's lost McMurra, he needs to take some chances and get lucky in order to be back in the game, and you know what, fair enough. Sadly, luck is not on his side. Phoenix actually wins the face-to-face and kills Yara. The Muyab gets splashed. The Muyab also dies. And with that, I am now really in a solid, good attack position. The only other thing that happens is a Mutt moves up to this position, and I decide to reveal my Agima to kill it. My thoughts are that with his Link team dead, that target is as good as any, plus I kind of like the idea of blowing up a Mutt with an Agima, and lastly, once the Agima's on the table, I can move him safely into his own, he's worth a bunch of points, and if he dies, I don't care too much. Dice are rolled, Mutt dies, and that's that. My next turn begins approximately from this position. I'm going to move the Agima down to, there or something to be worth points. I can shoot this Camille along the way, which is kind of nice. I also move Oiteros and his team over to this position. I kill this Farzan. I think I climb over this building to see the Farzan. And I also kill the hacker in the back, and I end up camping out over here. Yeah, here's another position. This is where the Agima is. Notice that he's watching backwards in case of Bakhtars. Here's another view. Oiteros, Myrmidon. That guy's got to be a prone Myrmidon, and Myrmidon. It is now my opponent's turn too. He has lost a lot of stuff, and it is Bakhtar clock. Bakhtar is going to appear right here and is going to try to kill Oiteros and as many members of the Link as he can. At this point, I am glad that I have Atalanta in this position because she reveals and gets a free shot on the Bakhtar as it appears. Her ballistic skill is 18, it's double action, so it should surprise no one that she manages to hit, and then the Bakhtar tanks both saves. At armor 4, it's not like crazy that the Bakhtar has tanked both saves, but at the same time, I am a little bit like, wow, this was a perfect play. With revealing Atalanta, I judiciously withheld her, and then I put my team in a position where she could watch the table edge against just this sort of thing. So the fact that I don't do any wounds is it's a little disappointing. What becomes even more absurd is that the Bakhtar then decides to move to, I don't know, here, and I again get a free shot on the Bakhtar with Atalanta, and again the Bakhtar manages to either tank both saves or maybe she misses, I don't remember. So this is now 2 shots, and I haven't done anything to the Bakhtar. This actually ends up being a little dangerous for me too, because the Bakhtar has a boarding shotgun +1 burst. As people who have played a Sujian will tell you, the boarding shotgun +1 burst, or heavy shotgun for the Sujian, is a really good gun. Burst 3 templates is extremely dangerous, and against Steel Phalanx, it actually means that I can't smoke dodge or he'll just dump templates through me. However, if I dodge, then he's going to be able to shoot me burst 3 at the +6 range band, and because the Bakhtar has MSV1, he's only even getting -3 because of my mimetism. Thus, doing anything that isn't trying to trade up with my own templates is going to be really dangerous. However, the Bakhtar's got 2 wounds, he's got armor 4 BTS 3, and apparently his dice are made of, I don't know, Fortunium or something really, really lucky, so simply just hurling templates and saves on him is, again, something that I'm not super stoked about doing. Finally, because this is only a 3-man link, if once I lose one of my members, I'm only down to burst 1 on the templates, and burst 1 on the templates really just is not a great chance of killing this guy. All of which is to say, I'm not super thrilled about that link being in this position, and I'm super not thrilled that Atalanta has missed her shot twice in a row. I mean, it does end up working out fine. Orderos does end up going unconscious, but I think I kill the Bakhtar or something like that. I don't remember exactly how it happens, but it is still something of a dangerous position for me, and that's worth keeping in mind. That done, things are pretty much a wrap-up for me. I basically am able to take my second Anomatarkos and run over here. There is an Asawir that needs killing, and I just kill it. It's not hard for me to throw smoke on the fellow and then just dogpile him in CC. And having done that, things are pretty much over. I'll only give a brief high-level summary of the game itself. I think I won because my pieces were able to kill more of his pieces, both because of good decisions on my part and because of riskier decisions on his part. In particular, this decision to fight Phoenix while splashing the Moyub was dangerous, and then, of course, I got lucky with Orderos not dying and the Myrmidon not dying when McMurrough came over there. That said, the things that I was hoping to learn about were Atalanta and the Agema, and I wasn't hoping to learn about, but I did get to learn about the sort of weird weakness of Orderos plus Myrmidons and nothing else on the list. Regarding Atalanta, I did learn that I kind of like her as an ARO piece, which means that being in Group 1 is kind of awkward. I needed her in hidden deployment in order to counteract the Bakhtar, even though she didn't actually do that, and because I needed her in hidden deployment, I didn't have her order when I was on the attack. Regarding the Agema missile launcher, it was kind of nice to have, 2 hidden deployment guys watching a lot of the board, and I thought the Agema in particular was going to just absolutely wreck this team. Maybe it would have wrecked that team had that team not gotten itself wrecked on Phoenix, but at the same time, I don't know, I wasn't that excited about the Agema in this particular game. Maybe it was just that he didn't need to be exciting, but I wasn't that excited about it. Lastly, I did not expect that the Orderos plus 2 Myrmidon team would be as awkward and annoying to use as it turned out being. I'm used to having 1 Myrmidon, maybe 2 Myrmidons tops. Having 3 and having 2 of those Myrmidons be the only support for Orderos really hurt. Do not like, and that will be a constant source of bother to me as I proceed throughout the league. I wasn't expecting to learn that lesson, but I guess I did, and that's, maybe a little bit interesting. Anyway, hopefully you found this at least a little bit interesting, and if you did, thanks for watching, and I will hope to catch you around.